In a time when 3D texture-mapped games still seemed like a far-off dream, Underworld kicked down the doors, guns blazing, and showed everybody how it was done. Programmer Doug Church had dropped out of his classes at MIT and joined up at LookingGlass when he'd learned what they were trying to accomplish with the Underworld project. Soon after, he brought some colleagues with him. Fellow MIT hackers like Jonathan Arnold, Dan Schmidt, and Tim Stelmach were all recruited to LookingGlass. At the head of the company, the venerable duo, Paul Neurath and Ned Lerner, a pair of developers obsessed with 3D tech and simulation. It may have been the most overqualified group of developers in the PC games industry at this time. It was that expertise that brought life to the continually impressive Ultima Underworld. Tracking Underworld's influence from its release to the present day is a task far beyond the scope of this scheduled programming, but its effects could be felt even in the immediate wake of its release. Competing 3D games like Synthetic Dimensions' Legends of Valor suddenly had stiff competition, and marketing pivoted to reflect that. Ultima Underworld Move Over, stated the ad in Computer Gaming World. Despite featuring some impressive outdoor maps and a relatively complex faction system, Legends of Valor received mixed reviews and sold poorly. In retrospect, Ultima Underworld Move Over was more like a desperate plea than an ardent command. On a more successful note, a 19-year-old John Carmack had seen the Underworld demo back in 1990 and taken it as a personal challenge. I can write a faster texture mapper than that. This led to Wolfenstein 3D and, in short order, Doom. A game that was so damn good and so ubiquitous that it caused a CRPG drought in the mid-90s, as computer game publishers only wanted to fund more Dooms. A small game studio based out of Bethesda, Maryland was working on a project simply titled Arena when Underworld was released. The lead programmer of Arena, a man named Julian LaFay, played Underworld and his feelings were mixed. On one hand, the game undoubtedly represented the future. On the other hand, he felt it had single-handedly rendered he and his team's work on Arena obsolete, both mechanically and technologically. The team hard pivoted their focus, moving away from the gladiatorial combat sim they had intended it to be. The game instead became a sprawling open-world dungeon crawler, with Underworld as a chief point of reference and a high watermark they were hoping to surpass. Arena would ultimately become the first chapter of the long-running Elder Scrolls series, and that's thanks in large part to Underworld's supremacy at the time. Even in its day, Underworld's industry influence was hard to ignore. Sales for the game would eventually reach soaring heights, outselling any of the mainline Ultima games. But immediately following its release, the game wasn't selling particularly well. This meant that despite how obviously impressive Underworld was for Origin systems, it was still a big experiment, and one that they didn't have implicit faith in. It may seem ridiculous looking back, but in 1992, publishers were still uncertain as to whether or not 3D games really were the future, or just an industry fad that would die off as quickly as it had arrived. It seemed that nobody wanted to go all in on this just yet. With that in mind, Origin Systems immediately greenlit an Underworld sequel, hoping to capitalize on the technology before consumer interest faded. The catch was that LookingGlass needed to make the entire game from start to finish in just 9 months, in time for the 1992 holiday season. Like many of the games that Origin had produced, it was an outrageous deadline and one for which the 18 employees of LookingGlass resigned themselves to 80-hour work weeks. The studio now benefited from past experience. For one thing, the technology that would power the game had already been built. The mechanical framework and world editing tools were available from the onset of the project. LookingGlass's total lack of departmental organization had also been amended, taking a page from Origin's company structure. Programmers had specialized tasks, artists worked on art, etc. Development no longer suffered from the chaos of having everybody doing whatever needed to be done in that moment and then moving on. Doug Church, who had joined as a programmer for the first Underworld, was given the role of project director for the second. This was a whole new world of responsibility for Church, but as a huge fan of the Ultima games, he took on the challenge. As with the original Underworld, Warren Spector, who was acutely interested in LookingGlass's output, was made the game's producer. He acted as a liaison between the company and Origin. If Doug Church's word is anything to go by, Spector was a critical figure in keeping Underworld 2 on the rails. Spector and Church would correspond via weekly phone calls, and Warren would drive up from Texas to Massachusetts where LookingGlass's offices were now located. He would make this trip once a month or so just to take a more active role in the project. Spectre's insight was just what the Looking Glass fellas needed to recalibrate. He would direct their attention where it was needed, while helping them to not sweat the small stuff. He was a very hands-on producer, and that was because he believed in Looking Glass more than any of his Origin colleagues. When it became clear that the art team was never going to make the deadline, Spectre recruited artists from Origin's various departments. Church would set up teleconferences with them, calling different area codes several times a week, trying to communicate what he needed out of monster and world designs over the phone. It was a dreadful way to work. As was the case with Origin and Ultima 7, Looking Glass simply couldn't get Underworld 2 out in time for Christmas. It was a shame because the folks at Looking Glass really wanted to go home to their families at this point. It had been 9 months of crunch. They deserved to go roast some chestnuts over an open fire, damn it. But such leisure was not in the cards for that holiday season. It seemed no matter how many bugs they fixed, there was always another one waiting around the next corner. Doug Church traveled to Origin headquarters in Austin, where he would put the final touches on the game. Looking Glass employees in Massachusetts would send code to Origin HQ via modem. Church and the other team members would work long into the night comparing hex checksums to make sure the finalized code was identical. There's nothing like 3 in the morning reading off 200 sets of hex numbers. Awesome. Totally awesome. At long last, Ultima Underworld II Labyrinth of Worlds shipped in January, and reviews were great, but the contemporary reception of the game only tells part of the story. The sequel isn't invoked nearly as often as the original, and many write it off as a simple continuation of what came before, but that's far from the case. As a follow-up to the original, this game is a truly fascinating product of circumstance. It's time we plumb the depths and once more head back into the underworld. Underworld 2's box art certainly stands out when stacked up against other Ultima games. Its limited icy palette communicates a totally different mood, chillier and more ethereal. Perhaps that's because it prominently features a wizard on the cover, contrary to our expectations of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed hunk wielding a sword and stamped with an ankh. It all just feels different. The included articles have this package feeling a bit closer to Savage Empire or Martian Dreams than a mainline Ultima. There's no trinket here at all, no baggie of runes or anything like that. What you do have is a player's guide full of spells and technical information to help you generate a character. A product catalog full of games and clue books for you to charge to your parents' credit card. Oh man, both Worlds of Ultima games for $30. It's actually a pretty smoking deal, even for the time. There's also a book, A Safe Passage Through Britannia, written from the perspective of Nystal, Lord British's court wizard. The requisite lore book gives us a crash course on Britannia's history. There's no specific premise for the game being communicated here, a la the previous game's Memoirs of Sir Kabirus book. Instead, it's a generalized overview which includes not only lore tidbits for the monsters of Britannia, but also short bios for all of the mainline series cast members. If you've been following along as I've covered the Ultima games, it may seem more than a bit repetitive to have yet another document outlining the history of Britannia. But consider this, Ultima 7 and Ultima Underworld 2 launched at an eye-watering MSRP of $79.95 US, which adjusted for inflation comes out to roughly $180 today. It's unlikely that the average Ultima fan would own every game, and thus getting people up to speed on the story was more a matter of necessity than anything. The game also contains a reference sheet you could prop up at your computer desk. Given the increasing complexity of PC game controls at this time, these reference cards became more and more necessary. Finally, there's a paper map of Lord British's castle. A far cry from the dungeon map included in the original, the castle appears pretty much as it does in Ultima 7. Between this, the character bios, and the appearance of the Guardian in the game's manual, it's immediately obvious that the second game is much more closely linked to Ultima than the original. That game was well into development before it was decided that it would be a part of the Ultima series. Here, it was known from the very beginning, and that's especially clear when you boot up the game for the first time. Through an introductory scene, we learn that it's been a full year since the events of Ultima 7. The Avatar prevented the Guardian from entering this world via Moongate, but in doing so, marooned himself in Britannia. According to the manual, the year since has been a period of reconstruction. This entails fixing the damage caused by the Guardian and untangling the societal complexities that have since arisen. Many people realized at once that they were indoctrinated by the Guardian's cult, the Fellowship. With egg on their faces, many Britannians have struggled to reclaim their identities, but all told, it has obviously been for the best. In celebration of the reconstruction, the Avatar and all of his friends are invited to a night of revelry and feasting in Castle Britannia. In the wee hours of that very morning, a shadow is cast over Greater Brittany. A black rock dome encloses the castle, trapping the inhabitants, including Lord British and the Avatar themselves. With no connection to the outside world, Britannia's greatest heroes are left to wonder what evils occur outside of the castle dome, and with seemingly no way out, the situation looks grim indeed. From there, you pick a character to represent your avatar. You choose your gender and select from a few different races. The player's ability to represent themselves was important for Doug Church, and there's a pretty good selection of avatars to choose from. I kinda like Florida Dad avatar, but I have a personal canon to abide by, so blonde bearded stud it is. Then you select a class and choose from a pool of related skills to specialize in. I'm picking a paladin. The nice thing about paladins is that everybody knows what they are. Everybody. Character creation is identical to the original game. Get used to that principle being applied in Underworld 2. Aside from a few notable tweaks, the game engine is exactly the same. On that note, if you're interested in a more technical explanation of how things like combat, magic, or inventory management work, I covered that to the best of my abilities when talking about the original game, so I recommend taking a look at that if the details are interesting to you. Here we'll be focusing much more on the game world itself, taking you on a journey through the titular labyrinth and seeing just how it compares to the original. Those differences are apparent from the moment you're given control. In the original game, you're dropped off in the Stygian Abyss, a totally hostile environment. Here, you're in Castle Britannia, a familiar place full of recognizable faces. You'll bump into the Avatar's good friends, Iolo the Bard, Julia the Tinker, Geoffrey the Fighter. You can always tell when you're in Dupre's room. There are even minor characters from Ultima 7, such as the castle nursery caretaker Nana, Nelson who runs the Lyceum, Syria, a warrior from Jalome, and Mayor Patterson, who cheats on his wife. Hey, I'm just listing off what they're best known for. They even reference various side quests you could have completed back in Ultima 7. That's pretty nice. Looking Glass really did their research. It's like they're making up for the lack of Ultima connections in the original Underworld. Underworld 2 takes a page from Ultima 7 and having Castle Britannia act as a tutorial of sorts. You're encouraged to walk around, investigating objects, finding and equipping items from your room, and talking. Conversations are a much bigger piece of the pie this time around. As we'll see, if you don't engage in dialogue early and often, you won't be along for this world. Your rune bag, which is a critical item that allows you to cast spells, is hidden behind a secret door. It might seem like an unreasonable place to hide something so important, but the castle is actually full of secret doors, all of which lead to the same perimeter. In order to even reach the first dungeon, you'll need to find one of these entrances. Plus, it tells you about the secret door with the rune bag in your manual. You did read your manual, didn't you? This all just emphasizes the fact that Underworld, if nothing else, is still a game of secret doors. If you want things to go smoothly, you best be examining every conspicuous wall, sometimes even the inconspicuous ones. Underworld's stellar auto-mapping feature helps a lot with this, showing you passages you may have otherwise missed. Before you're allowed to move on, you need to attend an assembly in the throne room. Lord British encourages everyone to keep their heads in the situation, when the Guardian suddenly appears to taunt us. He tells the group that only those who agree to serve him will be set free. For all others, Castle Britannia will be their tomb. It's a static scene that doesn't utilize voice acting the way that the previous Underworld nor Ultima 7's intro did. There are a few bits of dialogue from the Guardian later on, with Bill Johnson reprising his role, and he still rules.
As it is said on your world, wish thou wert here.
The good news about the silent intro is that Richard Garriott does not reprise his role as Baron Almric, which is a true blessing.
They say thou didst drop her to a troll waiting below. What sayest thou?
That said, the Guardian's grand entrance being this static screen betrays the fact that Looking Glass's budget was smaller this time around. This does mean less wiggle room for epic cutscenes and elaborate animations. One thing I appreciate about the dialogue in the intro is that Looking Glass got ahead of cheeky players pointing out plot holes. Everybody pipes up and says, yeah, well what about the gargoyles? Surely they'll save us. And Lord British is like, yeah, they'll probably try, but remember that humans and gargoyles kinda hate each other, so don't expect those two groups to work together in this situation. On top of providing an explanation for why we've got to fend for ourselves, it also acknowledges our experience playing prior games. Yeah, humans and gargoyles do hate each other. They probably wouldn't make great allies even given the circumstances here. Once you've got a weapon, some runes, and a map, you're ready to delve into the sewers beneath Castle Britannia. Sewers aren't the most exciting way to kick off a game, but if there's a secret exit anywhere, it'll be there. Before you even have a chance to establish a familiar rhythm of fighting enemies, looking for loot, finding keys and switches, and progressing to new levels, you'll encounter a hard stopping point: the Headless. Much I say, has been said about the Headless. From the moment you enter the first dungeon to the point where you'll reasonably encounter the Headless, you got about 90 seconds of becoming accustomed to the game. If you're not familiar with the Underworld games, you'll probably ask what the big deal is here. Well, the big deal is that the Headless have considerably higher vitality, armor values, and attack power than almost any other enemy on this level. The first time you encounter a Headless in the original game, you'll be well into the second of 8 floors. You'll have a couple of level ups under your belt, some potions, better equipment. In the sequel, you'll fight some bats, a worm, and then not one but 2 Headless follow that immediately. When an enemy's defense vastly outranks your attack, you end up not only failing to harm them, but damaging and breaking your own weapons. Meanwhile, if you get hit once or twice by the Headless, that's it. It's completely unreasonable. No matter how many times I swing, I can't do a damn thing about them. I'm plinking away with my butter knife doing next to no damage while they completely thrash me, and this is one of the first rooms in the first dungeon. This doesn't bode well for the rest of the game. How the hell is anybody supposed to deal with this? First of all, let's do what any self-respecting CRPG player would do in this situation. Let's take a look at the manual. Note that the sewers beneath the castle of Lord British are very dangerous. They are thousands of years old, and the evils that exist there have had plenty of time to prepare for your visit. Many of the sewers' perils are too difficult for beginning adventurers and should not be attempted till later. Don't try to clear each level before moving on to the next one. Instead, keep exploring downwards, looking for some clue to a weakness in the Guardian's spell. So, the answer to the question, how do you deal with this, is that you don't. Nah. Ultima Underworld II teaches you very early on that the engagement of every hostile you come across is not compulsory. In fact, not only are you given the choice to flee or circumvent enemies, you're actively encouraged to avoid confrontation at times. Now, such a possibility may seem like obvious folksy RPG wisdom at this point, but it's wisdom we've largely cultivated in the years since Ultima Underworld II, not prior to it. That's why they make such a special mention of it in the manual. There's scarcely an enemy in an Ultima game that can't be dealt with at the time in which it's first encountered. On the other side of the pond, your Final Fantasies and Dragon Quests were largely built on a linear difficulty curve. Some enemies were challenging, and some bosses may even have necessitated grinding for levels, but rarely would you have been placed in a situation where you were literally not meant to engage with the foes you came across, doubly so in the first 5 minutes of a game. The lesson here is clear. It's not always worth diving headlong into a scrap from which you may not emerge the victor. Ted Peterson, writer and designer of the first Elder Scrolls game, fondly recalled an early encounter with an enemy he couldn't defeat, one that was meant to be circled back to later on. The satisfaction of coming back later and kicking its ass made an impression on Ted and helped inform the way he'd design his own game. Case in point, it wasn't a commonly adopted idea in CRPGs, at least not yet. This adds a dynamic of player choice that Ultima hadn't explored up till now. You'll quickly learn the difference between, I can't handle this right now, I can handle this right now, and, oh, I can handle this right now. In a world where valuable equipment and resources can be scarce, the rewards for overcoming can be quite titillating. They can also be pretty disappointing. Sometimes you'll break all of your gear and use up all your healing potions just to find a rune you already have, but the decision ultimately is yours to make. Now, even in the earliest moments of the game and with a non-optimal build, the Headless can be overcome. It might take a few tries and even a little bit of luck, but they're really not that bad. I have the benefit of experience having played the original game, but it's not this nigh impossible battle of attrition that it's been made out to be over the years. I even killed them after accidentally drinking a potion of hallucination. If my avatar can overcome in the thick of an ayahuasca trip, anything is possible. Do you understand the internal demons he's facing right now? All of the external demons he's faced pale in comparison. For your trouble, you're given a good quality longsword and a pair of chainmail boots, not to mention enough experience points to grab an early level or two, a nice reward for an early optional challenge. Whether you choose to deal with the Headless or not, your first dungeon, the Castle Sewers, is a fairly straightforward one. As a matter of fact, compared to the first level of the Stygian Abyss, it's downright wimpy. You might be wondering why the Avatar would be having trouble with Headless, never mind rats or bats. Well, it turns out that the Avatar is out of shape after a year of loafing around. It's a pretty ridiculous justification for sending us back to level 1, but I suppose needs must for the sake of balance. Kinda makes me miss those early Ultima games where you could import your characters. There are a few other Headless-esque challenges to overcome. A couple of gazers guard a locked treasure chest, which you have very slim odds of opening. An evil tree guards some treasure in a forgotten corner, while the Avatar is helpless in the face of its oaken strength. If you're quick enough, you can run past it and grab a key which opens the castle armory. It's full of some nice gear, and it's a great early game reward if you're willing to take the risk. There's a room absolutely stuffed with Headless and a cavern filled with poisonous dread spiders. There are some passages which are inaccessible, as well as doors which are locked and impossible to bash open right now. It all reinforces the need to, first of all, take notes on your auto map, and secondly, keep in mind the possibility of coming back here later on. As with several of the floors in the last game, this isn't a one and done level, but an environment to be explored and recontextualized later on when you have access to more tools. As a whole, the Castle Britannia Sewers, it's a serviceable first dungeon. It's nothing too special, doubly so when compared to level 1 of the Abyss, which is nothing short of a masterwork in level design. In the sewers, you'll find disappearing floors and moving sluices forcing you into some platforming, which doesn't work all that well in this engine. The fourth level of the sewers is a wide open area without much to guide the player or draw their eyes to points of interest. All of that said, it's only once you reach the very bottom level of the sewers where the game gets interesting. The Avatar was told by Nicestool that, based on the generators from Ultima 7, when a Blackrock object is created, a smaller, magical version of that construct comes to exist within the Blackrock. At the deepest point in the sewers, we find a magical Blackrock gem, a smaller version of the dome which encloses Castle Britannia. One of its faces glows faintly, and upon touching it, the Avatar is teleported into a small locked closet. Bashing our way out, it appears as though we're in a castle storage room. Kind of strange, the Blackrock must have warped us here, but it's immediately clear we're not in Castle Britannia. As a matter of fact, we're not in Britannia at all. Heading up the nearby stairs, a goblin asks us for a password in order to gain entry into their tower. Without an answer, we have no choice but to slay him and all of the other goblin guards. One floor at a time, we take on this entire fortress in a grueling and challenging combat segment. You have to find keys from goblin bodies in order to open the next door and advance upward through the level over and over. Finally, at the apex of the tower, you find a prisoner who offers precious information. For your first challenge after the tutorial dungeon, it's pretty relentless. But hold on a second, let's back it up a bit. Remember that storage room where we started? If you search thoroughly, underneath one of the food crates, you'll find a signed delivery voucher. Presenting it to the goblin who asks for a password, you'll be allowed to enter the tower under the guise of a courier. On each floor, you'll have opportunities to interact with your surroundings in a different way. On one floor, the goblins will haze you, and you kinda just have to tolerate it. What's this guy doing? Oh, pardon me. I'm so used to the Britannian custom of never bathing that I didn't even consider this possibility. On another floor, you'll find a guy who looks like me. Not the Avatar, but like me. Okay, that's kinda weird. Whatever plane of existence we've been sent to, it seems the Guardian has dominated it. Goblins now carry out his will, and humans have been enslaved for his purpose. Felix, who was once a prince in this land, has been made to do manual labor for the goblins, and his comrade's tongue has been cut out for his insolence, rendering him silent. One goblin is actually quite friendly and offers you something to eat. After being mistreated by all of the others, I'm feeling a bit of Stockholm Syndrome at this point. The tower's commander mistakes the Avatar for a torturer sent by the Guardian to extract information from a high-profile prisoner. In any given situation, you have to carefully navigate dialogue so as to not give yourself away, and also act cool. This means not opening chests that aren't yours or bashing down locked doors. Anything that draws attention to yourself can lower your standing with the goblins, and once that dips low enough, they'll become irrevocably hostile. This kind of social stealth angle is a very unique way of opening up Underworld 2, and a welcome break from dungeon crawling. By playing methodically, you'll also learn about the state of the world outside of the castle. Speaking with the enslaved humans, you can get a broader picture of the Guardians' multi-planar domination and what Britannia may look like in short order. If you have a few optional conversations with the goblins and memorize a password, you can gain access to the jail cell of an angry troll named Garg. If you're kind to Garg and set him free, and why wouldn't you be, he's a sweetie, he'll run amok, murdering every goblin in the tower before settling down and offering to train you in unarmed combat from then on. And again, if you prefer, you can just slash and stab your way to the top of the tower, and that's totally valid. It's a lot harder, but it's also simpler and nets you plenty of experience points. No matter how you approach this section, a prisoner named Bishop awaits you at the tower's peak. Having heard tales of the Avatar, he lets you know that he's a resistance fighter in this world. You're told that the goblins have been harboring a black rock shard, one with magical properties that may be useful. In order to enter and leave this cell, you need a pair of special mittens, so hopefully you've got an extra pair, or else Bishop is stuck here. Worry not, friend, I'm sure Garg will be a good caretaker. He'll send turkey legs through your laser cell, you'll never go hungry. Finding and taking the black rock shard, we can head back through the basement storage closet and into our world. As the game's first post-tutorial world, there's a noteworthy degree of player choice going on here. It culminates in the same goal, which is speaking to Bishop and learning a bit more about the situation, but the pathway there is up to you. As we'll come to see, this choose-your-own-adventure quality is something that greatly differentiates this game from the original. Now, the focal point of Ultima Underworld 2 is the Blackrock Gem. There's a convenient shortcut that connects the entryway of Castle Britannia to the gem so you have easy access. You'll enter a new world, eventually find a Blackrock shard, and then come back to Britannia. The court wizard Nystol is the most important character in the game, certainly more than Lord British, who just stands around most of the time. What are you even doing, you useless lout? Nystol's magic can activate the shards you find, allowing them to be slotted back into the fractured gem. He believes that once all of the shards are reunited with the gem, it'll become unstable. This is key to the predicament because the gem is essentially the dome's generator. If it can be destroyed, then so can the dome. The magical shards have been scattered across worlds, which is the impetus for our world-hopping quest. Once a shard's power has been restored by Nystol, you can combine the shard with the gem and gain access to a new world from one of the gem's gleaming faces. Open up New World, explore New World, find shard in New World. The obvious thing to do following Ultima Underworld would have been to replicate that game's structure, 8 or so giant levels for you to explore, all part of one cohesive dungeon. The sequel treads a very different path, and the ramifications of that are many. For one thing, you've got a central anchor point throughout your adventures. Castle Britannia acts as a hub, in a manner of speaking. You can't go to any level from the castle, but it leads directly to the Blackrock Gem where you can. The castle has plenty of weapons to replace your broken gear, ample food supply, and people who can train you in all of your different skills. Your carry weight is quite limited, especially if you're wearing plate armor, so you'll only want to take whatever food is necessary, dropping off excess resources and quest items in the Avatar's bedroom. Oh shit, hope you're not planning on having company in here, Avatar. Just kidding, we all know he's a stalwart virgin. We played Ultima 7, you be proud of your race car bed and extensive magic wand collection. Each time you return to the castle, Miranda of Lord British's Great Council will record your adventures and fill you in on the happenings since you last left. Looking Glass did a very respectable job of making the castle feel like a real evolving place with real people wandering around it, down to the fact that some people are so slow and you can't move past them. You just have to let them wander the halls, no problem, nothing important going on here. The characters will often have new dialogue when you return, which is a really nice feature. I appreciate getting to learn about all these little intergroup dynamics that are forming. Some people have cabin fever, others are unexpectedly taking charge. Some are developing feelings for another, while others are becoming irritated by their peers. Faradwin, who ran the Fellowship homeless shelter in Ultima 7, is under constant suspicion and scrutiny from the others who believe he harbors loyalties to the Fellowship. Dupre, who's been long established as a listless alcoholic, is starting to lose his mind without some kind of purpose to fulfill beyond menial chores. Mayor Patterson is trying his best, but most people simply don't like him, no matter how hard he tries to be helpful. All this really goes a long way in reminding you that life goes on while you're off saving the world. This is a group of people trying to keep their heads in a grim situation. There are also frequently conflicts that arise, forcing you to get involved. At one point, Nana, who runs the castle nursery, goes on strike with the other servants. They refuse to work unless Lord British stops calling them servants and refers to them instead as domestic management, and also gives them a say in how the castle is run day to day. If you don't relay their demands and get Lord British to agree to them, the game comes to a complete standstill, and presumably everybody dies in this Blackrock grave. Great time for bargaining, Nana. You can't even behead her, you just get thrown into the castle prison if you try. In the original 3.5-inch floppy disk version of the game, failing to resolve the strike immediately would soft-lock the player, effectively ending the game. In the interest of our continued adventures, it's best to resolve these problems as they crop up, no matter how petty they may seem. In an interview with the Gambit podcast, Underworld 2's writer Austin Grossman stated that Castle Britannia from the onset was meant to be a hub, filled with reactive elements, little things that would change depending on the progress that the player had made. This would give the player a reason to get reacquainted with the people and places within the castle again and again. Austin was somewhat frustrated with the incongruence of Underworld 2's RPG elements. The emergent gameplay possibilities in combat and exploration seemed far more interesting to him than the limited conversation system. An example he brought up being the fact that you can have a conversation with someone, then throw a fish at them and not have them react in any way. Well, Austin, if the avatar threw a fish at you in real life, I bet you'd just stand there too, but I understand the point being made here. Moving forward, Looking Glass would focus on minimizing that cognitive dissonance, often by not having any interactable NPCs in their games.
My name is Rebecca Lansing, and I'm a counter-terrorism consultant to Trioptimum.
Another reason to consistently visit the castle is to apply your skill points. Leveling up is a little bit different here in the sequel. In the original game, you had to first learn the mantra associated with the skill you were looking to level up. From there, you had to scour the underworld looking for a shrine where you could chant the mantra and trade your points for skill advancement. Basically, certain skills could only be leveled up once you reached a certain point in the game, or if you wrote down the mantras from a previous playthrough, or if you just googled it, but we're in 1992 here, stay in character. The point is that your ability to build your character was hard-gated in a way that did feel somewhat arbitrary. In the sequel, you'll naturally earn training points as you gain experience and level up. Many of the NPCs in the castle and elsewhere serve as trainers in specific skills, increasing your abilities in exchange for training points. Nelson will train you in lore, Julia can boost your traps or repair skill, etc. There's no need to hunt for mantras. Here, all of your skills can be leveled up from the very beginning, which is just a better system. It gives you more freedom to build your character from the moment you start the game. As an aside, I love how they made the training diegetic. If you ask Patterson to teach you how to be charismatic, it doesn't say, "You leveled up your charisma." It says, "Patterson's tips are surprisingly insightful." If you don't have enough skill points, it says, "Patterson tries to explain how he works with people, but you are unable to see his point of view." It may seem like a small thing, but the way that Underworld massages its RPG mechanics into the credibility of the game world is admirable. It serves a higher goal of drawing the player's focus away from all of these arcane stats and variables, making NPCs feel like people who incidentally have expertise in areas of the avatar's interest, rather than walking, talking, level-up repositories. It brings to mind Richard Garriott's goals in Ultima 4, where he was trying to undermine the player's ability to min-max and hyper-optimize their character. The pace is slow enough here that you have an excuse early on to experiment and develop a playstyle rather than abiding by some invisible metagame. Unfortunately, the usefulness of certain stats means that this experimentation often doesn't amount to much. There were many problems with the skill system of the original Underworld. Chiefly, many of the skills are almost useless, and only a small handful are truly worthwhile. You don't really benefit from lockpicking when punching doors down is just as much of an option, and one that doesn't use any resources. Putting points into stealth or tracking seems like it could engender a unique playstyle. In reality, you can just see enemies and walk away from them, or even run past them with little consequence. Certain skills were made redundant or so situational that one could hardly justify leveling them up outside of role-playing reasons. It's understandable given the circumstances. Underworld was the first of its kind, a big experiment with no real precedent to follow. With that in mind, it's disappointing that the sequel falls into most of the same traps. such as the same Traps ability continuing to be useless. The skills worth investing in haven't changed here. Weapon skills, attack, defense, casting, mana, these are the really important ones. There are some that give you an advantage. Acrobatics allows you to survive falls you may not otherwise, and lore increases the chances you'll identify a magical item, but not by nearly enough. Repair can be useful in restoring low-quality equipment, but you have to invest so many points to make it worthwhile. Charisma increases the odds that you end up with a good deal when bartering, and Appraisal gives you better judgment when evaluating a deal when bartering. That's two separate skills for a very insignificant part of the game. I think I've bartered twice in my almost 3 playthroughs of Underworld 2, and even if you're on the wrong side of a deal, you'll find so much gold and so many jewels that you never really run the risk of going broke anyway. I feel like there were opportunities to right some of these wrongs. For instance, imagine having these decisive moments where the sneak skill actually comes in handy, allowing you to avoid being thrown in prison or something, saving you a few minutes of aggravation. Or giving the player a reason to invest in unarmed attacks, such as having a certain punch that stuns an enemy for a few seconds. As it stands, there's no good reason to pick unarmed over any other weapon skill. What if instead of strictly affecting the barter system, Charisma occasionally gave you an extra dialogue option, maybe to get a better reward or a shortcut past a fetch quest? These are just suggestions, and I'm deliberately trying to stay conservative knowing that Looking Glass had less than a year to make this game. If it seems unreasonable, I'll point out that Doug Church said in a pre-release interview that Charisma does affect your dialogue options. But as far as I can tell, that's not the case. I seriously doubt it was a lie so much as it was a good intention that was left on the cutting room floor out of necessity. I think there are many small tweaks to the skill system that could have offered a richer role-playing experience. Outside of trainers, your biggest reason to return to the castle is getting Nystol to treat the Blackrock shards. Nystol can also raise your casting ability and mana pool, two of the most important stats given how useful magic is in Underworld 2. I can't believe how dignified he looks compared to his portrayal in Ultima 6. Not to mention he's got a bookshelf full of Calvin and Hobbes like a true aristocrat. He's also got a copy of Wealth of Nations. Where did you get this? I think this guy's coming to blows with Nana before the game is over. Capitalist pig! Pinko bitch! Charles! After the first gem is treated, you can enter the second world, Killorn Keep. Much like the Goblin Prison Tower, you'll immediately come across some non-hostile guards, and also giant cats walking around. Whatever realm this is, Killorn Keep itself is a sort of waypoint between worlds, a place where many come to trade, including the Avatar, if you so choose. You'll meet an interesting cast of characters here, including the senile lord of the keep, Thibris, an ale-swigging warrior named Lobar, and the duplicitous wizard, Mistel. This world too has been conquered by the Guardian, long ago in fact. The keep's Lord Thibris and his subjects are loyalists, having mainly positive feelings about the Guardian. Once again, this means winning the trust of others by navigating conversations carefully. On top of feeling like a stranger in an even stranger land, there are many situations where you're forced to engage in subterfuge to progress. In Underworld 1, you were simply the stalwart avatar. While not every inhabitant of the Abyss understood the significance of that, your lines of questioning were straightforward and honest. I'm the Avatar, I'm here to find Ariel, have you seen her? In Underworld 2, the Avatar's relationship with the people around him is much more complicated. Each world you explore has a different sordid history with the Guardian, and the people within those worlds have varying degrees of loyalty to his dominion. You can't just loudly declare yourself the savior of Britannia. Instead, you have to beat around the bush, getting a sense of someone's allegiance before you decide how to approach a situation. For instance, there's a rebel fighting against the Guardian named Altera in Killorn Keep. Mistel, a bureaucrat staying at the keep, doesn't trust her. After winning Mistel's trust by answering her questions, she'll ask you to spy on Altera and find information about her activities. Being truthful and telling Altera about Mistel's intentions will win you an ally in the fight against the Guardian, but it's not obvious that telling the truth is such a good idea. When you enter the keep, a man named Relk will ask who you are. If you tell him, he'll scurry off to a back room somewhere. If you enter that room while exploring, he'll attempt to assassinate you on behalf of the Guardian, so the degree to which you should be upfront and honest with others is never entirely clear. Between moments like these and having to keep up a disguise in the prison tower, your business within the realms of Underworld 2 feels clandestine. This tints the story even darker than the original Underworld. As you see what the Guardian has wrought across planes, the situation feels urgent and often hopeless. You're forced to adapt your tactics, kissing up to guardian sycophants and avoiding unnecessary attention. It's a sort of stress that I really appreciate, the kind I haven't felt in the series since dealing with Blackthorn's domination in Ultima 5. You're forced to seek these scattered rebels like Altera and Bishop, these little embers of hope lost in worlds where hope has long gone. In this world, the Guardian's people train Trilkai, a species of cat that can sniff out dissenters. Everybody seems to be terrified of them. But like, has anybody tried to stop and talk to them? They're pretty nice. This one would just like a tall, cool glass of water. Totally doable. This one would like lost knowledge regarding the origin of her people. That's harder, but we'll work on it. One of the things that makes Killorn Keep interesting, at least in principle, is that it's not just a standard fortress. It's actually a flying castle floating high above the desert in some strange world. There are plenty of mysteries within the keep that can be uncovered, but remember, in each world, your primary goal is finding a Blackrock shard, and it can be anywhere. If you head down into the basement of the keep, you'll find a secret passageway leading into a small alcove. If you step on this incredibly suspicious floor tile, you're teleported to Mr. Bones' wild ride, and it's not half as fun as it sounds. After finding the Blackrock shard down here, you'll return to headquarters, and it's at this point that Underworld 2's peculiarities as a dungeon crawler are impossible to overlook. In point of fact, the amount of dungeon crawling you'll have actually been doing for the past 4 or 5 hours is quite minimal. You can get through the prison tower and Killorn Keep easily without even drawing a weapon. Most of your time is spent exploring or speaking with others. That ebbs and flows throughout the game, but conversing and storytelling in general remain central pillars of Underworld 2. Plot and dialogue in the first game were minimal, just enough to facilitate the dungeon crawling which dominated the game's runtime. Just look at the size of these maps, they're enormous, and each one can keep you busy for hours. Compare that to the maps of Killorn Keep. It's tiny, and only the second floor is really a dungeon if you want to get technical about it. The first floor is a foyer with some common areas and bedrooms. This focus on dialogue, puzzles, and character development alongside the standard gameplay remains a divisive shift in priorities. Underworld 1 was an extremely well-executed, high-concept game. Its ideas were ambitious, but straightforward and communicable. Big dungeon, 8 floors, emergent gameplay possibilities, get to the end. Underworld 2's elevator pitch is a bit messier. Epic story set across space-time, level-based environments with a hub world, many characters with unique motivations that need to be spoken to at different points in the story. The game feels less cohesive because you're constantly being sent somewhere else to do something totally different. Just when you're getting a handle on things, the rug is pulled out from under you and you're forced to adapt to a new situation. As we'll come to discover, there are good features that emerge from that, and some that are less than ideal. To be fair, the following level, the Ice Caves, is a much more traditional dungeon. It's also likely the most iconic area in Underworld 2, aesthetically syncing up with the game's cover art. The gameplay here has you traversing a set of maze-like spaces, finding keys, loot, uncovering secrets, and battling the denizens of the cave. Much more in line with expectation given the first game. There are a few wrenches in the machine here, taking advantage of some tweaks made to the game's engine. For one thing, much of the floor is covered in slippery ice. Once you step onto the ice, it's almost impossible to stop unless you spam the jump button and get lucky. Otherwise, you bounce off walls until you're on firm footing again. The Yetis in this area toss snowballs at you, so trying to hit one of them while sliding on the ice and avoiding projectiles can make for some interesting combat situations. There are also floors that break, dumping you into the icy water underneath. I was pretty surprised the first time I saw a bloodworm hop across a gap that I had just made, and downright delighted when I caused a Yeti to drop through the ice, eliminating it and avoiding a combat situation. The game manual says it best. We feel that one of Underworld's strongest features is its capacity to generate situations and strategies that we did not script, but that arose from the scenarios we created. These moments of emergent gameplay that characterize the first game are still here, albeit fewer and further between due to how the game is structured. For example, the fact that you're frequently encouraged to act like a civilized human being instead of running around launching fireballs at everything that moves. On that note, it's worth talking about some of the changes made to the magic system. You can get away with not using magic in Underworld 2, but I strongly advise against that. Magic is really helpful, in some ways more than the original and in others less. One thing I noticed early on is that the spell Levitate requires an additional rune. To refresh your memory, casting a spell is a matter of finding the requisite rune stones somewhere in the world. Once you have a rune, you have it for good, and some of the higher level spells require rare runes. These are often found much later in the game, sometimes as a reward for side quests. In this way, you're prevented from casting game-breaking spells early on, but in a way that feels tied to exploration, as opposed to arbitrarily gated by your level. It's mostly just a nominal difference, but it goes a long way in making you not feel cheated as a mage. That said, needing an additional rune to cast Levitation may not seem all that significant, but it changes a lot. In Underworld 1, you could cast Levitation pretty quickly. The wind and movement runes required could both be found on level 2 of 8 at the earliest. Now, the Levitation spell really changes your relationship with the environment. It gives you an opportunity to circumvent obstacles and find high-up points of interest. All of a sudden, there's an entirely new axis for you to consider when surveying an area. This gave the game a real sense of verticality in its level design, some floors more than others, but it was almost always a factor. In Underworld 2, Levitation now additionally requires a Raise rune, which is only found well into the back half of the game. The rub here is that most of the level design is much more horizontal and less full of vantage points, shortcuts, and crevices to explore. To put it bluntly, the dungeon design of the first Underworld game runs circles around the second. The sequel compensates for this by constantly presenting the player with unique situations. In the ice cave, you've got the ice and the holes in the floor. There's also a water current that can carry you away, where water was static in the original game. In the sewers, you had stuff like the disappearing floors, there's teleportation traps and Killorn Keep. The thing is, most of this stuff is just annoying and only serves to slow you down. Having fully functional slippery ice in a 3D space would have been quite a flex for Looking Glass in '93, but when you have to backtrack through the ice caves for the umpteenth time, and you will, dropping through the floor and bouncing off of walls like you're in a Three Stooges episode becomes tiresome more than anything. In fact, these instances of backtracking are where traversal abilities like Levitation would have come in handy more than ever. It's a really cool moment when you follow the cavern near the Blackrock Gem and realize it's a shortcut that leads you directly into the castle. All of a sudden, these locked doors and seemingly useless passageways you were seeing make sense. In lieu of Levitation, it would have been nice if such shortcuts had been integrated into dungeons. You can find moonstones which are used for gate travel, but once again, by the time you use them, you've nearly finished the game. This is the one time in an Ultima game where I do think they should have given you the moonstones early, and it's the one time they didn't do it. Actually, they're ruthlessly well hidden considering how little of an advantage they provide. Aside from a few changes to rune usage, the second game also gives you a bunch of new spells, some of which are indispensable. Unlike the standard pantheon of spells which are conveniently displayed on the reference card, these new spells are tucked away, written on a note, or only revealed through optional dialogue. The first one you can find is the Bounce spell. It's pretty self-explanatory, and there are some fun things you can do with it. It's described in a note as too undignified for most wizards. That won't stop my avatar because he can't read. He also has no dignity. Look at this bedroom. The Map Area spell allows you to immediately commit your surroundings to the auto map. This can be helpful, but generally I prefer to map things out for myself so I know where I've already been. On that note, be careful if you find map scraps on the bodies of deceased explorers. Once you apply them to your map, you can't undo it. And okay, James Joyce, thanks for your life story. I didn't want to write my own notes anyway. Mending has got to be one of the most useful spells in Ultima history. Your gear gradually loses condition as you fight and take damage. The wear and tear actually becomes visible on your armor if you're wearing it, which is a subtle but wonderful addition they made for the second game. In the original Underworld, gear could be repaired at Shack the Dwarf's cave on level 2 of the Abyss. It was nice to have the option, but it was an inconvenient trek to make, and after handing over your stuff, you had to wait in real time for the repairs to finish, on top of paying a fee. In Underworld 2, there are no smiths, nobody to repair your stuff in fact. This hypothetically makes the repair skill more important. Well, let me tell you, I had one character with an almost maxed out repair skill, and even in that case, repair sucks. Most of the time you either break your armor or damage it, leading to a playstyle of forced save scummery. The Mending spell, however, is great because it repairs your gear to maximum condition. It uses a ton of mana and has a chance to backfire, but never having to worry about your stuff breaking is such a load off the player's mind. These hidden spells are always jotted down in sensible locations. Mending is found scribbled on a note in the locked armory of the prison tower, adjacent to the blacksmith. Map area is found amongst the remains of some ice cave explorers who met an untimely end. Valor, which improves your combat skills, is taught to you by an advanced wizard in a combat arena later in the game. You don't just learn spells for the hell of it, there's always a rational explanation for where a spell is learned or who it's learned from. Some of the hidden spells from the original game carry over, so if you jotted them down, you can cast spells like Water Walking, Sheet Lightning, and Alright, let's cut the shit. I know I'm gonna use it, you know I'm gonna use it, let's just do it. I'm gonna cast Armageddon. What the hell? Oh, right. The Black Rock. It's explained to you by Nicestool that the Guardian's Black Rock Dome has magic corrupting properties. This was demonstrated by the use of the material in Ultima 7 to disrupt the ether. What this means is that casting any spell above the 4th circle is impossible while you're in Castle Britannia. Which I knew, you guys. Should have seen your faces thinking I was good. Unbelievable. I'm actually the one who's allowed to be mad because you guys really thought that I would do that? That's sickening of you. Anyway, in terms of dungeon design, Underworld 2 does have a few winners. It's a very backloaded game in that way, but it never reaches the soaring heights of the original. The areas here are smaller, more linear, and not as well paced. But outside of the mechanics of dungeon design, there are a few ways that the game really stands out. One of the original game's greatest assets was its ability to tell stories without leaning on traditional methods like text-based dialogue or voice acting. Either through notes left behind or even just visuals, you could come across these memorable little scenes and asides that told you something about the world your avatar inhabits. That kind of storytelling is at the forefront of Underworld 2, and it's such an innovative facet of the game. One example of this can be found in Killorn Keep. You can optionally sneak up to Lord Thibris's bedroom, where you'll find a locked chest among some other goodies. Picking the lock or bashing it open, you'll find the contents of the chest. Eyeballs. A bunch of eyeballs. Weird. Much later in the game, you'll battle strange floating brain creatures who drop these eyeballs as loot. Incidentally, if you complete a side quest for a man at the keep, you'll be told about a secret door that leads to a chamber underneath the keep's barracks. After working out the location of several secret doors and defeating a demonic guardian at the door to this chamber, you enter and find 2 enslaved floating brains, their magical powers being harnessed to keep the castle floating. Now, as a brief aside, you can kill these floating brains, which causes the keep to violently quake before plummeting to the ground. Everybody in the keep is killed, and the resulting damage has totally changed the layout of the level. This dooms the player, as doing this will kill quest-necessary NPCs, but the very fact that you can just stumble across these creatures and cause this havoc, and that the level layout actually changes to reflect it, is all just an amazing bit of player cause and effect. That said, finding this secret brain chamber and later on realizing that those brains dropped these eyeballs clues you into why they might be in Thibris's personal chest. Is the implication that Thibris keeps these body parts around to create more brain creatures if necessary? Have other brains died under his care and maybe he's just a sentimental guy? It could be that the eyeballs themselves have useful magical powers that he uses. Maybe he's just a crazy old man who collects eyeballs. I don't know for sure, and you're never explicitly told anything, but I love that the game quietly establishes this connection. The eyeballs are essentially useless, strictly there to add some flavor to your surroundings and enrich the lore running underneath the game's plot. All the while, the average player may not even enter this bedroom, much less open up this chest. Those who do aren't necessarily going to make the connection when they see more eyeballs 30 hours of gameplay later. That attention to detail is one of the most impressive things about Underworld. Looking Glass didn't just rely on the wow factor of the game's 3D engine to prop up your sense of immersion. They really poured love and detail into the dark corners of Underworld's environments. If you're not paying attention, you'll miss this kind of thing, and it's everywhere in Underworld. There are so many stories quietly being told and secrets to unravel that aren't germane to the player's goals. The game constantly invites you to become a part of its world. That's a noble goal, and one that's hell of a lot harder to achieve than simply luring the player in with promises of loot. Little things like Dupre's bedroom being full of alcohol communicate details about this world to the player, sometimes subliminally. Looking Glass, even in their earliest days, understood that the video game is a unique medium in its storytelling capabilities. There are experiences that the player can partake in, whether they be profound moments or the pieces of a puzzle come together, or poignant realizations that call no attention to themselves. These experiences go far beyond a cutscene, a dialogue box, or even a blurb in the game manual. Environmental storytelling is a game-spanning clockwork puzzle for the player to solve, and the rewards for doing so can't be weighed in gold or experience points. There's a great moment in the ice caves where, after solving a puzzle to open up a floodgate, you gain access to a whole new area. You can tell when Warren Spector is involved with an Ultima game. He loves it when ice melts and expands the map. You enter this zone and see the remains of a city that's been frozen solid. Houses with iced-over doors stand empty, aside from furniture and clutter left over from previous owners. It's as though these people vanished in an instant. Upon returning to Britannia from this area, the Blackrock Gem Cavern underneath the castle is now crusted over with ice. The Guardian froze that last world to death, and it's looking like Britannia is next. It works so nicely as a way of increasing the sense of urgency, particularly because it doesn't call any attention to itself. If I walked through the portal and the Avatar said to himself, "Uh-oh, it's getting chilly in here. I better get us out of this castle before our world becomes Ice Cave 2.0. The emotional effect would be completely undermined. A confident storyteller lets the listener feel something without manipulating them into feeling it. What's more, and I didn't even realize it until well after the ice caves, but solving the floodgate puzzle and entering the Forgotten City, speaking with a ghost about the death of her world, none of this stuff is actually related to the salient goal of finding the Blackrock Shard. In fact, you can grab the shard and go back home in about 5 minutes if you know where you're going. Now eventually you will need access to the ruined city, so it's not like there's no purpose in doing all of this, but I find it interesting that these grand adventures are often so well integrated into the level that it all feels necessary to your goals at the time even when it isn't. I think that speaks to how much of the joy in playing the Underworld games is simply exploring, immersing yourself in your environments rather than ticking off your objective boxes and moving on. Compared to the original game, the Blackrock Shard collecting makes for a sturdier main quest. In Stygian Abyss, your goal was to find 8 talismans, and that could be a very intimidating task. The talismans were spread out across a vast game world, often without much by way of direction for the player. In comparison, the gem shards serve as a more compartmentalized goal in each of the game's levels. You know collecting a gem isn't the only thing you should do in each area, but it's the least you should be doing before moving on. It gives you an anchor point, allowing you to measure your progress without guesswork, but still leaving room for exploration. In the first game, talismans were the be-all end-all of the main story. Aside from battling the Slasher of Veils and saving Ariel at the very end of the game, pursuing these MacGuffins was your primary driving force. Characters almost always existed solely to give you talismans, to give you hints about talismans, or to give you items which would help you reach the talismans. The MacGuffin in Underworld II's case, that being the Blackrock Shards, only give you a mechanical reason to keep going. When you meet characters whose goals coincide with your own, you're driven by purpose beyond needing 8 items to beat the game. In a much more personal way, it establishes the fact that lives and worlds are at stake here. The plot drives the exploration, as opposed to the other way around. It may not seem like it from the outside looking in, but that's a pretty huge distinction between the two games. It's one of the many ways in which you can feel Ultima 7's influence on Underworld 2's scenario design. Having all of these separate worlds undoubtedly makes the game feel less cohesive, but it brings some benefits with it too. The concept of centering the game around alternate dimensions came about after the patchwork development of the original Underworld. In that game, different team members were assigned to design different floors of the Abyss. As a natural byproduct of that, you had different priorities, which made the Abyss somewhat uneven in its design. Some floors were much more dialogue heavy, some had more combat challenges. Some had winding, vertical, labyrinthian levels, others were much simpler. The point is that each one felt a little different, leading to a lack of uniformity in design. For Underworld 2, Looking Glass decided that instead of trying to thread the needle of a whole team's worth of ideas, they would turn that diversity of design into a feature. That to say, the intention here is to have each area feel dramatically different from the previous one, and that gives Underworld 2 a license to get pretty weird. Between the prison tower, Killorn Keep, and the ice caves, each one feels quite different, but all are grounded in some kind of recognizable underworldness. That all goes out the window in the area following the ice caves. Talorus. Talorus is where the game unzips its chainmail khakis and flops its gelatinous three-eyed alien creature onto the table. The beauty part of designing a game where you're hopping between dimensions is that you're only limited by your own imagination. and an engine that is technically incapable of rendering outdoor environments. It puts a bit of a lid on things, but Looking Glass may do. Talorus is a downright psychedelic plane of existence inhabited by beings of pure energy called Talorids and their peaceful pets, the Vors. The Talorids have some difficulty with English but are able to communicate with the Avatar. Once upon a time, the Talorids were individuals with wills of their own, but the Guardian changed everything. With his tyrannical power, he altered the Talorids' behavioral patterns so that each one could only serve a hyper-specific function for the good of the group, or more accurately, for the good of the Guardian. The resulting society is one of both fractured individualism and unthinking collectivism, where no Talorid has a will of its own, but each is assigned a task that only they can do. It's a contrast to our situation in the castle, where everybody kind of wants to be doing something, but nobody really knows exactly what that is. Now, it goes without saying, but the environment here is very distinctive, with multicolored veins running through the walls, a land of deep blues and greens, hover shafts used for transport, and strange alien creatures wandering around, some beyond human perception. It's pretty far out, man. A step in a really bizarre direction, and one that's weirdly at home in Underworld II. Now, I haven't mentioned the game's visuals because up till now they've been awfully similar to the first game, but there are some points worth mentioning. First of all, the gameplay viewport is now about 30% bigger than the original, which is just unambiguously great. More game, less clutter. The texture mapping algorithm used in the original was also improved, allowing for larger bitmaps which are displayed with less distortion. Despite the engine being almost a year old at this point, Underworld II was still a great looking game for 1993. Now let's pretend it's relevant to us and take a look at the system requirements. The minimum you'd need to play Underworld II included a VGA-compatible system, 2 MB of RAM, 11.5 whopping megabytes of hard disk space, and a 386 processor. As you can see from this footage, a 386 was not an ideal way to play this game. Even the lowest end 486 would have resulted in a huge jump in performance. Underworld II conveniently has several detail settings to help the game run on older systems. Each one drops the texture mapping on one facet of the environment, from the floors to the ceiling to, at the very lowest setting, pretty much everything. It also simplifies the lighting too. It's actually kind of an interesting way to play the game, giving you a better sense of how the engine works under the hood. Outside of the technical differences, the art style of the sequel has been altered in a few key ways. For one thing, there are way more polygonal objects now, stuff like shelves for plants, paintings hanging on the wall, tables, barrels, what have you. There's more 3D now, which makes for more immersive environments, at least it would have at the time. Many of the character and enemy sprites also look quite different now. A society is measured by its giant rats, and I don't know what the difference here says about our new world. This one just chills here and doesn't attack you. I've named him Pepsi, he's a good pal of mine. You can see it when looking at the differences between the goblins or the skeletons. Underworld II is aiming for a more gritty, realistic, kind of dark fantasy art style. The original is much more comic booky, with heavily outlined sprites and relatively simplistic forms that would have been at home in an early Ultima game. I can't deny that some of the original game's charm is lost in translation. The pixelated enemies are quite expressive in their cartoonishness, but the amount of detail that's gained in the sequel is worth the trade-off in my opinion. Not to mention this grittier look is more appropriate given the tale that's being told here is darker and more mature overall. I think the most notable visual improvement would have to be the portraits. They're much larger, allowing for far greater detail than was possible. I actually really like the little thumbnail portraits in the original game, but many of the characters in Underworld II look fantastic. There is a bit of a mismatch in art style between characters, which is a common problem across Ultima games. Like this guy. He looks like an egg wearing a disguise. But given the increased emphasis on dialogue, the portraits really help contribute some personality to these characters. It helps to have a good idea of what the person you're speaking to looks like. A major difference here is also the color palette. The original game was constrained mainly to dungeon-y colors, lots of browns and grays. When you did get some blues for water or orange for lava, it was striking because you didn't see it a whole lot. It was appropriate, but it was limited. Reportedly, it made gathering screenshots for magazine ads quite difficult. Conversely, the sequel is pretty out there as far as colors go. Even the ice cave, which is much more grounded than some of the levels, is made up of these piercing, unnatural shades of blue, like a zone-wide black light is shining on everything. Even the more orthodox dungeon levels have quite a bit of variation in the textures they use, which makes identifying different sections much easier at a glance. I guess to put it really simply, you could just say that Underworld 2 is a much more visually complex game than the original. Better geometry, higher resolution textures, just more details. The soundtrack in general features more tracks with much greater variation. Although there is plenty of crossover between levels, each world nominally has its own theme song. Through the use of different instruments, these songs match the surrounding area in tone and atmosphere. The Ice Cave theme, for instance, has those chilly-sounding chime synths that we always think of when icy environments come up. The theme for Killorn Keep is appropriately dark, empty, and uncertain, with some occasional bizarre, almost unpleasant-sounding reed pipe soloing to remind us that we're in a foreign environment floating high above a desert. It's unlike anything from the original game. This is all via Roland MT32 emulation. According to some, real gamers use the Sound Blaster. I don't know, you tell me. All of the game's tracks, composed by Dan Schmidt and John Blackley, share a leitmotif, that being the game's theme. So much like the Blackrock gem at the center of these worlds, you're always kind of tethered to something recognizable. There were a few digitized sound effects this time too, as opposed to the MIDI-based sounds used in the original. Stuff like doors creaking, enemies crying out in pain, swords swinging. There's a lot done using real recordings. It goes to explain that absolutely outrageous 11.5 megabyte file size requirement. Underworld 2 might look and sound the same as its predecessor at first glance, but considering the time constraints Looking Glass were working with, I think it's a solid evolution. It's a bit aesthetically inconsistent at times, with some sprites appearing to be from a totally different game than others. In context of the game's chaotic development cycle and the world-hopping plot device, I think the inconsistency is excusable, and even kind of appropriate at times. Speaking of world-hopping, the goals we're given on Talorus are unlike anything we've seen in the game yet. Speaking to the historian Talorus, he recalls a time when his people felt happiness, yearning, and other feelings beyond the desire to serve their purpose. He tells the Avatar that he'll help us find the Blackrock Shard, but only if his people can be set on the path to freedom from the Guardian. This entire section dips heavily into Sierra adventure game territory. Talorus seems a bit intimidating at first, but it's actually laid out quite methodically. Knowing that each Talorus serves only a specific purpose also forces you to think rationally about how information is best gathered here. We're told that one particular Talorus named Bly Scup Ductasnor is in charge of the Bly Scup chamber where Talorus are scupped, that means created. He was altered to become the Guardian's right-hand man, producing only Talorus that fall in line with the Guardian's beliefs. Therefore, if we can break into the Bly Scup chamber and scup a new Bly Scup Ductasnor who wasn't a fan of the Guardian, that Ductasnor would scup Talorus with free will again. In order to do this, you have to talk to a host of enigmatic Talorus. As mentioned, there's a historian who knows what's already transpired, but there's also a futurian who knows what will transpire. And apparently we got this in the bag, so that's encouraging. There's the data integrator who can teach us how to use the Delgenizator to scup a new Bly Scup Ductasnor, but only if we can present our inquiry in a way that he finds satisfactorily specific. This means visiting the Dialogicians, whose entire purpose is developing new ways of conversing with one another, using phrases like, "get your gnaws out of the fribbery." The behavior crystal needed to scup a new Bly Scup Ductasnor with free will has been sent to the incinerator for termination at the Guardian's request. The good news is that the conveyor belt running to the incinerator only moves a few inches every couple of years, so we can still find it down there, along with a lot of boots for some reason. I can't help but be curious about the evolution of these things. However, the Futurian, who's been helping us, has alerted the three-eyed Vors to the fact that we're an intruder, so now they're attacking us and hindering our progress. The Futurian isn't malicious, he only did it because he looked into the future and saw that he was gonna do it, so he just did it. You can't be mad at that, he's just closing a time loop, it's his job. After running around learning how all of the different devices work and how they're used to create a new Bly Scup Ductasnor, we kill the old Bly Scup Ductasnor and make a new Bly Scup Ductasnor, but this one's better, it smokes cigars and plays blackjack. With the future secured, the historian teleports the Avatar to the center aisle within the incinerator where the Blackrock Shard awaits. Thus, our business in Talorus is concluded. For now. If there's any one segment of this game that harkens back to the strangeness of the worlds of Ultima games, particularly Martian Dreams, this would be it. The Talorus dialogue is funny, the entire situation is appropriately bizarre, and the music and visuals are disorienting. In terms of what you can actually get away with in an Ultima game, Talorus is really pushing the boundaries. On a first playthrough, the novelty alone is enough to make it enjoyable. It's just so different from anything else in the game, being comprised almost entirely of logic puzzles. It was a real risk for Looking Glass to design something so vastly different from expectation, both mechanically and aesthetically, and I can appreciate the creativity. That said, when you tear down all of the hallucinatory weirdness, you're left with a level that feels out of place, and worse, like a slog. You're just walking around the perimeter of this world, having conversations with these obstinate little balls that frequently becomes frustrating as you try to parse what they're telling you. The Talorus' non-traditional methods of communication force you to use context clues to translate their dialogue into workable next steps. That's an interesting challenge, but one that can feel like work before all is said and done. It doesn't help that Talorus is a pain in the ass to navigate. Its layout is simple, but the Talorus are spread across this large upper level. There are teleporters that take you across the floor, but you still have to check your map frequently. And these bouncy pads you have to use to move up and down floors are annoying as hell, forcing you to take damage every time you land on one. It's a unique, atmospheric world, and something that's going to stick out in the mind of anybody who's played Underworld 2, no matter how long ago it was. It's like a Star Trek episode or something. But as a level, it can also feel like a chore at times, and begs to be bookended by some more traditional dungeons. Something that really separates this game from the original is all of the concurrent main quests that happen parallel to the Blackrock Shard Hunt. Rather than having one goal, you're often juggling multiple quests, switching priorities based on which world you're in. In the castle, for instance, you return to find that Lady Tori, who you might remember is the woman whose baby I stole in Ultima 7, yoink, has been murdered. Many suspect Feridwin, others believe a creature came through the gem and killed her. Whenever you return, you can investigate, asking for people's opinions and alibis. While it can't be solved immediately, it adds an additional layer of suspense to the castle segments and creates distrust among the group members. There's also Altera, the resistance member living in Killorn Keep. She'll task you with hunting down a creature employed by the Guardian known as the Listener, living somewhere beneath the castle. In a forgotten corner of the lowest floor, you'll find and kill the Listener within a lava cavern, one that only opens at this point. Quests like these happen concurrently alongside your shard hunting adventures. While it's nice to have a variety of tasks, it has the knock-on effect of restricting your freedom in various ways. There are certain internal conditions in the game that have to be met before you can progress to new areas. If you don't kill the Listener or speak to Miranda about Lady Tori's murder, you simply can't go to the next world. From a gameplay perspective, this makes sense. When there's multiple quests and plot threads going on simultaneously, sometimes the player's attention needs to be redirected. Imagine going through all of the levels and then showing up in the castle afterwards and everyone is like, "Oh, Avatar, by the way, we solved that murder, so don't worry about it." And the Avatar is just like, "Murder?" Obviously, the player needs to be kept up to speed, which means hitting quest checkpoints, so to speak. Underworld is usually good at gating certain sections in an organic way that subtly nudges the player. You can't go anywhere or do anything, but you never really feel like you're being robbed of your agency. If you're unable to explore a part of a dungeon floor, it's usually due to a deficit in your character's skills or a lack of tools, and therefore something that can be remedied. In Underworld 2's case, those gates frequently dip into pure game logic territory. You're never given an in-universe explanation for why you can't enter the next world without first speaking to these particular characters, but neither does the game just come out and say, "Listen player, you can't go to the next level until this particular boolean is set to true." So it's kind of an awkward middle ground where the game has enough integrity to not break the fourth wall, but still arbitrarily restricts you based on your progress in unrelated matters. Sometimes these conversations where you're given a critical task to accomplish are only brought up once and can't be triggered again. If you don't write it down or remember after taking a break, you're just screwed. That's a lot of potential worlds you have to wander around in, flipping switches, finding items, and hoping you come across the right doodad to progress. In some sense, what makes Underworld 1 such a beautifully executed game is its simplicity. There are side quests and there is missable dialogue, but almost all of that stuff only assists you in your goal, which is to find the 8 talismans. There's usually more than one way forward, and more often than not, your reward is information as opposed to necessary key items or quest triggers. Underworld 2 adds this additional layer of complexity in the form of numerous parallel quests, speaking with different people and exchanging items or information. This is beneficial because it drives further exploration, gives some personality to the NPCs, and acts as a more explicit form of world building. The problem is that having all of these quests makes tracking player progress exponentially more difficult. You may have gotten so caught up in the Blackrock Shard quest that you completely forgot about Altera asking you to construct a magic staff for her 20 hours ago. Looking Glass likely didn't have the time or resources to solve this problem in an elegant way. As a result, your player freedom feels more restricted, making the titular Labyrinth of Worlds feel more like a collection of video game levels than a coherent world like the Abyss. One of the most impressive things about that first game is that the player is dropped into a functional world, and that's where their relationship with the game master ends. Here's the starting line, get to the finish line. As long as you save Ariel and kill the Slasher of Veils, how you do that, where you go, who you talk to, what items you have, what quests you choose to complete, that's your business, and that's beautiful. That's as pure a simulation as any RPG has ever been. Underworld 2 ramps up the narrative angle, giving you reasons to care about these people and the world they live in, and that's great, but there's no way to have that without it casting some kind of shadow over the systems-driven gameplay. One of these side quests you're given involves using a magic staff to sever the Guardian's control over the different worlds. You have to bring Altera a few different items to build the staff, which means backtracking through some of the previous areas. As much as backtracking is a dirty word, I actually like that the game gives you reasons to revisit prior worlds. It makes all of these levels feel less disposable. Even after the staff is built, you'll have to do more backtracking as you're tasked with finding particular places of power on each plane. Most of these are fairly obvious, such as the abandoned city and the ice caves. Some require a bit of guesswork, but there's usually an NPC nearby who can tell you where the Guardian's power is concentrated. From this point forward, the game becomes more traditionally Underworld-like, with some twists and turns. The Scintillus Academy is pure dungeon crawl, but in a uniquely structured and controlled way. The Academy was built as a final exam for magically inclined students looking to become independent wizards. When the Avatar arrives in Scintillus, there's nobody to be found except for a prospective wizard named Elster. He's been sitting in this waiting room for 63 years, waiting for an opportunity to retry the exam after he's failed. There's a little buzzer on the wall that's supposed to call a wizard down to initiate the test. So for 63 years, he's been sitting here, pushing the button and waiting for the test to start. Hey, they do establish that time flows differently between worlds, and his mother packed him a robust lunch. I'll be taking that. There's also a functional vending machine in this lobby, which is kind of a clever way of letting the player stock up on supplies if they came ill-prepared. Immersive sims and vending machines have always been kindred spirits. Obviously, with the Academy empty, we've got no choice but to take on the exam, enduring 8 floors worth of challenges. As a dungeon, the Academy essentially plays like a grand tour of the Underworld engine's capabilities, with each segment demanding something different from the player. Doug Church specifically mentioned in a pre-release interview that designing puzzles around the physics engine was a priority for the second game. That being the case, Scintillus is where the team flexed their muscles on that front. You've got challenges like having to place heavy items on pressure plates to open doors. This may seem like the most elementary of physics puzzles now, but in 1993, using objects with physical properties to affect the environment like this was unheard of. The rationale for each floor's challenge is a different wizard-adjacent skill being tested. Spatial reasoning, cause and effect, non-reversible processes. This equates to, among other things, sliding ice puzzles, teleporter mazes, and platforming segments. Unfortunately, this means you have to do sliding ice puzzles, teleporter mazes, and platforming segments. Yeah, it's not all fun and games. It's an exam. But there are enough optional sub-areas with enemies and treasure to find that the puzzle solving is broken up sufficiently. It's meant to be a test of your endurance, that's why there's vending machines and emergency exits back to the starting area found periodically. None of the tests are particularly challenging, and it's kind of refreshing at this point to have a more straightforward dungeon crawl without any dialogue. Once you reach the top floor of the Academy, you can also attempt to break into the Wizard's secure vault. It exists in some kind of subspace between worlds, and mechanically it feels like an extension of the rest of the Academy. My favorite is the one where you have to circumvent the walls of several rooms to reach the other side, because it's one of the few places where the bounce spell really comes in handy. Man, if they don't want people stealing their shit, maybe they shouldn't make their vault such a hoot to break into. Reaching the end, you're teleported back to the beginning. There's actually nothing in the vault, or so it seems. You have to find a secret door, which leads to some treasure. Neat, but not all that great. But then there's a second secret door, which leads to some more treasure, and you can only enter it if you save those magic gloves from the prison tower you used to enter Bishop's cell. If there's any series where the hoarding instinct pays off, it's Ultima Underworld. Once again, it seems like a dead end, but this is where the reveal spell is useful. The true reward is a bunch of very rare runes, and man alive, you have to be one thorough son of a bitch to find all of this. You really feel like you're breaking into a wizard's secret stash, a hidden floor behind an impassable barrier, behind a hidden door, behind another hidden door, hidden within a secret vault that can only be entered after traversing 8 dungeon floors. Yes, magic kicks ass in this game, but it comes at a cost. After this is concluded, you're given free reign to wander around the Scintillus dormitories, and it's pretty unsettling. Not a single person can be found in these massive halls. Bedrooms full of furniture and supplies are abandoned, like the lost city in the ice cave. Keep looking and you'll find not only the Blackrock Shard, but the site of a mass slaughter. A pentagram, undoubtedly linked to the Guardian, has caused a horrific event, and the remains of every student and professor are found nearby. It's a grim conclusion to our adventure in this world, and you almost just trip over it. Another example of how the quiet moments in Underworld always leave the biggest impressions. On that note, returning to the bottom floor with the shard, you may notice that Elster isn't here anymore. If you head back into the exam and do some sleuthing, you'll find human remains in a room full of mongbats. Among the remains, a note from Elster's mother. You have no reason whatsoever to go back into this maze, and to reach this spot you have to deliberately take some wrong turns. Hell, after all the hours you spent in Scintillus, you may not even remember Elster or care about what happened to him. But for those who care to look, there is yet another dark conclusion for one of the Underworld's many stories. The original game was a proof of concept in how immersive sim storytelling ought to be executed, but here in the sequel, Looking Glass really hit its stride. The combination of environmental storytelling, extensive optional dialogue, and player choice give you the sense of this world's story before you arrived here, and the tools to continue that story too. In the first game, the player spends many hours becoming familiar with the Abyss and its history. With only a short amount of time to get the player acquainted with each level here, the writers pulled out a lot of stops in making these worlds feel lived in. Looking at Killorn Keep, for example, you have visual cues regarding the state of the world, such as banners proudly displaying the Guardian. In dialogue, you're given the sense of an extensive history which unfolded long before you arrived. You're told of an interdimensional battle with a rebel named Praecor Loth who fought against the Guardian. He was forced to retreat to the northern wastes of his own world, where he was slain by Lord Thibris. I use this as an example to illustrate how the qualities of Underworld II's storytelling are much more epic than the original game, matching the increased scope. It's also a matter of necessity. As I said, you don't have 25 hours to bring the player up to speed. You get a few hours in each world at most. So to the end of making these places feel authentic, they all have predefined backstories that can be learned at the player's discretion. I think it's a good compromise. Not everybody is going to care about the world, but for those who are interested in the lore, there's usually something to uncover through dialogue or notes. Regarding player choice, it has two forms in Labyrinth of Worlds. The first is through what's typically referred to as player expression, choosing to levitate up to a platform instead of finding a staircase, picking the lock on a door rather than finding a key or bashing it down. You can even find a well-hidden magic tool called the Cudgel of Opening, which automatically unlocks anything you hit it with. Instead of walking the intended way, you can cast a water walking spell to move against the current of a river in order to find a shortcut. These are examples of player expression in action. If the player can choose their own goals and their own approaches to an obstacle, then when they reach the goal, it's far more satisfying. Flexible simulation of game elements is a powerful way to enable the player to make their own way in the world. Your toolbox becomes more extensive as you find items, level up various skills, and, perhaps most importantly, find runes which allow you to cast more spells. These tools, combined with Underworld's hands-off simulation gameplay systems, make you feel like you're in control of any given situation. The rules of the game give you the opportunity to dream up your own solutions, rather than following the narrow pathway set out for you. Another very different form of player choice is one that was largely lacking in the first Underworld and the Ultima series in general. This is what's often called authorial choice, possibilities presented to the player by the author. In the prison tower, for instance, you could find a delivery voucher, or you could start wantonly killing goblins. You could slay the leader and take his shard yourself, or you could release Garg and let him do your dirty work. Saving or assisting certain characters can lead to different outcomes. You might gain a useful item or information that's critical to your situation, but the important thing is that it's not mandatory. There's a great example of this in the world following the Scintillus Academy, the Pits of Carnage. In yet another unnamed world, the Guardian has created an underground prison colony for those who oppose his will. Here, much like in the Britannian city of Jalome, colonists duel with each other to the death in order to prove their supremacy and earn respect. It's a very brutal Mad Maxy situation, and a welcome contrast to the worlds that come before it. You find out quickly that Dorstag, the current champion of the pits, has a Black Rock shard, and the only way to get a hold of it is to kill him in the duel. The thing is, as a lowly pit dog, your challenge won't be accepted. You have to prove yourself by challenging other prisoners and accepting their challenges in turn. Much of this level has you fighting warriors and wizards in the 4 different elemental arenas. You gradually gain renown, which is actually reflected in-game. People who wouldn't give you the time of day when you first arrived begin to start treating you with respect. Others who would have boldly waltzed up and challenged you to a fight suddenly turn tail and run when you challenge them. People even start defacing the Guardian's property to show you respect. Avatar kicks. You're damn right I kick. I kick so good you wouldn't even believe your eyes. Eventually you'll earn the right to challenge Dorstag, which already has a micro-choice associated with it. Per the rules of the pits, the one who is challenged has the right to choose the arena. If you challenge Dorstag, he always picks the arena of fire. It's a cramped space with no room for maneuvering. Dorstag has tons of health and hits like a truck, so you need all the help you can get. If you make fun of his scars, he'll challenge you out of anger, allowing you to choose an arena with some more breathing room. It's kind of cool, but there's a larger choice you can make here as well. Underneath the pits, you'll find another traditionally Underworld-esque dungeon. It's populated with some of the toughest enemies you'll have fought yet, including golems, a demon, and a lich. Of all the things they could have brought from Ultima 7 into the Underworld series, I have to say, lich was not at the top of my list. Enjoy this while you can. Once I seize your phylactery, you'll be my bitch. At the very bottom of this troublesome and oppressive dungeon, you'll find a troll. And once again, this troll, by the name of Blog, doesn't want to kill you. In fact, Blog just wants to play a game called Rock with you. I find the rules of Rock admittedly somewhat esoteric, but as far as I can tell, you choose your Rock and then Blog typically wins. I'm in no position to challenge his ruling, so I play several games of Rock with him, which seems to put me in high esteem. If you speak to Dorstag at any point after becoming buddies with Blog, the troll will arrive mid-conversation and just take the shard right from Dorstag's hands. I love that he touches his scar when Blog shows up to big blog him. Subtle isn't the right word, but it's a nice blink and you'll miss it way of giving Blog and Dorstag some history. Dorstag turns tail and Blog gives the Blackrock shard to his good pal the Avatar. He even makes his mark in the world. Godspeed, you beautiful creature. Regardless of how you choose to go about the Pits of Carnage, the outcome is the same. You'll receive the shard and you'll go back home. Yet the paths to reach this point are so different that it's worth replaying the game just to experience that difference and others. I can't rightly say it's easier to find Blog, but circumventing the need to go pick fights with prisoners is a really good way of rewarding the player's curiosity. On the other hand, fighting those prisoners is probably the single most efficient way of gaining skill points in the game. There's lots of them, and they're basically experience point pinatas if you're comfortable with the combat system. Like I said, different strokes for different folks. I only wish that the charisma skill played a larger role in these kinds of forking paths. Having Underworld's level of gameplay freedom within these grander, authorial choices lends a sense of self-determination to the game. You really feel like you're in control of the Avatar's story. Watching how that affects the environment and its agents, such as the changing graffiti on the walls or the prisoners gradually respecting you, gives you the sense that you're actually making an impact on this world before leaving and moving on to the next. That's a great quality for an RPG to have. Unfortunately, no matter who you talk to or how much of a sleuth you are, the murder case of Castle Britannia ends the same way. The Avatar speaks with Nelson. As he's about to tell us something important, Mayor Patterson enters the room and stabs Nelson in the neck. The Avatar is forced to kill Mayor Patterson. Guards storm the room and Patterson cries out to the Guardian for help before telling the Avatar that he knows everybody secretly hated him. The Guardian does not come to save Patterson as he hoped. That's now 3 people from the original group dead, people who the Avatar actually had history with in prior Ultima games. Despite the limitations in how the engine can present scripted scenes like this, I think interactions like the murder of Nelson by Patterson do a good job of balancing scripted drama with simulation. When the guards walk in afterwards, it feels like a natural occurrence rather than something that's predetermined. While the NPCs can't react to fish being thrown at them, the fact that they have some basic schedules and can be found roaming the halls is pretty impressive. It's also annoying, because, they just don't get out of the way. But given the circumstances, Looking Glass did a good job of matching Ultima 7's narrative elements while focusing on what the Underworld engine does best. On that note, the next location, the Tomb of Praecor Loth, is the best dungeon in the game. It's so good, in fact, that I think it might be the best Underworld dungeon, period. The tomb is full of unique challenges, lore, and one-of-a-kind interactions. It's already got some hype behind it, being the resting place of the Guardian's worthiest adversary, after the Avatar, of course. The first floor of the dungeon is almost entirely optional, aside from a single hallway housing the Blackstone Shard. We're not just here for the shard though, we're here to confront the ghost of Praecor Loth, to bring back his mighty horn, said to have the power to destroy armies when blown, and, perhaps, to destroy the Blackrock Dome. While you can immediately head to the next floor, it's worth going through this dungeon slowly and methodically. By solving puzzles and defeating enemies, you can put together 8 different pieces of a torn map, giving you some insight into the challenges that await you. Oh mama, they call me Mr. Lots of Skeletons. I'll be the judge of what lots is. Okay, there's lots. There's lots of skeletons. You also find the Sword of Stone Strike on the first floor, which is such a good weapon that it's not even really fair to use it. Every time you hit a non-undead enemy, they turn to stone. The effect stacks, so you can basically just sit back and spam the attack button. It's game-breakingly good. The second floor is basically a mass grave for all of Praecor Loth's servants and associates who were buried here with him. As such, the various undead creatures you find here aren't actually hostile. Besides, how unbelievably rude would it be to start swinging at Mr. Bones while he's just trying to pay his respects? You really gotta use the look command in this game, making sure a particular creature isn't hostile before engaging. Such a misunderstanding very nearly led to the death of Pepsi.
I'm upset!
That's especially true in the Tomb of Praecor Loth, where many of the entities are standing sentinel as opposed to actively trying to harm you. These spirits are rather troubled. Most refuse to speak to you, but some can be communicated with. One ghost has lost his bones and asks you to delve into the dungeon to find them. There's no real reason to help him other than to be a good person. Just look at that shuffle. What a good day he's having. 'Tis now a pleasure to stroll through the tombs. The ghost of Praecor Loth's wife has been buried far away from her husband, so she asks you to check on him for her. You can also meet the ghost of Loth's adversary, Silanus. He tells you of the 3, Loth's closest allies who still guard his tomb. Through conversation, you're given a much greater understanding of this world, called Rhiannon, and its history. The Avatar is warned to turn around so as not to incur the wrath of the 3, but we won't be leaving without the horn. This level of the tomb is expansive, with plenty of traps, puzzles, and hidden doors housing precious loot for the intrepid adventurer. You'll find many bodies strewn about, other foolhardy adventurers questing for the horn. Sometimes Guardian signet rings can be found amongst their bones, implying that the Guardian has sent people here to retrieve the horn, obviously to no avail. You really have to use your brain to navigate these sections. Tools like the Cudgel of Opening or a spell of telekinesis that lets you push buttons across chasms are particularly helpful here. But regardless of how badly you may have botched your character build, there's always a path to victory. Some are just more straightforward than others. Once we've overcome the challenges of the tomb, the final confrontation awaits. Here you encounter the 3, the assassin Morpheus, the warlock Umbria, and the warrior Leth, a woman who served as Loth's top general and, to the chagrin of his wife, his mistress. The 3 have tethered Loth's spirit to the world of the living so that he and they may continue to live in denial of his defeat at the hands of Thybris. The 3 have to be defeated one after another, breaking their spell over Loth's mind. Each one lives in their own separate chamber, opened by different magical means as well. Finally reaching the king's grave, the Avatar gently informs Loth that he's no longer king and this isn't his castle, it's his grave. Loth is momentarily distraught by this revelation, but realizes that in letting go he'll at last find peace. He grants the Avatar his horn and fades into the ether. Returning to tell his wife, we find that her ghost has left. Everybody has left. With Loth's acceptance of death, his tomb has been sanctified. His subjects, loyal even in death, have been allowed to pass on. Thus ends the saga of Praecor Loth, warrior king and feared enemy of the Red Titan. This dungeon rules. Great dungeon with a great concept. Fresh challenges, awesome character designs, epic stories tied to a 3-tiered boss battle with a nice moment of micro-closure prior to the climax of our own story. This, my friends, is peak Underworld, and it's a shame that the tomb towers so singularly above the other dungeons. And I'm not saying that they're all bad, but if just 2 or 3 of the other dungeons could have hit the standard of quality set by Loth's tomb, then I have no doubt Underworld 2 would have gone down in history as one of the greatest sequels ever made. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The game isn't over just yet. There's a whole other world and some loose ends to take care of. For one thing, severing the Guardian's lines of power. Hope you've been remembering to do that, by the way, or you have to go through all 8 floors of the Scintillus Academy again. There's another big problem. Praecor Loth's horn can only be blown by him. The Avatar has pathetic little bug lungs, while Loth's lungs are more akin to those of a wolf or a powerful monkey. This will have to be remedied, magically. Deep underneath the pits of Carnage, you'll come across one of the most powerful wizards in the many worlds, Zoranthus. He's retreated to the depths of this world where he can carry out his experiments with no interruption. Of his many triumphs, perhaps the most impressive has been the capturing of an air djinn, an extremely powerful demon capable of leveling buildings with their breath. In order to gain the strength necessary to blow the horn of Praecor Loth, the Avatar must become possessed by the air djinn. Under normal circumstances, the being is far too powerful and would destroy the Avatar's body, but there are ritualistic preparations we can undergo to protect ourselves. Within the ice caves is the last known deposit of Phalanium mud. It must be treated with a rare substance called basilisk oil. This oil is extremely rare. You can find it in the Academy vault, in the hidden quarters of an underground lich, or behind a locked door in the Castle Britannia sewers, the key for which is only found close to the endgame. Finding the mud and combining it with the oil, the Avatar must bathe themselves in it. Following this, you have to wade through lava in order to treat the substance coating the Avatar's skin, and then cast a spell of iron flesh. Doing all of this creates cast iron magical armor of Phalanium. But of course, we still need the air djinn. If there's one thing I know about wizards in Ultima, it's that they never just do things because it's good for society. In exchange for the air djinn, we have to find the Scepter of the Deadly Seeker, which can only be found in the Ethereal Void. Ah yes, the Ethereal Void. Sounds doable. We've had one previous encounter with this void. It was at the very end of Underworld 1, where the Avatar ran for his life as fast as he could to get away from giant skulls and other various things. Well, the void is back, baby, and it's just as weird as ever. Intersecting multicolored roads floating over an endless black expanse, inhabited by otherworldly creatures like hellhounds, gnashing disembodied teeth, and caustic flying fish. It's a hallucinatory nightmare world where everything's made up and the points don't matter. This area is separated into 4 distinct color sections, each one serving as a self-contained challenge, sort of like Scintillus Academy. Thankfully, the game doesn't rely too much on giant mazes or frustrating combat challenges at this point. After the tomb, it's nice to have an area where you can kind of just enjoy the bizarre ride you're being taken on, sometimes literally, what with the conveyor belts and bouncy pads and whatnot. The original Underworld had you playing Pac-Man, while this one gets you to play Q*bert to change the color of these pyramids. One of my favorite segments is when the Avatar is teleported back to a Sausarian dungeon from Ultima 1 of all places. Having it rendered in real-time 3D as opposed to the mock 3D perspective of that first game is a fun way of flexing the difference in tech over the past decade. The Ethereal Void is also implied to be a celestial crossroads where magically inclined dreamers can share Euclidean space with each other. Here you can find Iolo's dream self wandering around while he's sleeping back in Britannia. It's a small detail, but I like that Iolo dreams of himself as a much younger man than he is in reality. You can also find Rawstag, a troll from the original Underworld. He still refers to you as Rodriguez and can only be found in the red section of the Void. You know, because in the first game he was obsessed with red gems and made you bring him one. His dreams have come true. I find it hilarious that trolls more than any other race are so attuned to the arcane that they just casually dream of the Ethereal Void every night without understanding that it's special in any way. You have the opportunity to speak with a Zoranite Wisp as well. There's a nice moment of payoff here. You may recall a crack I made about leaving Bishop behind in a prison cell back on level 1. Well, you can actually find a second pair of magic gauntlets which allows him to escape. If you do this, the Wisp will be grateful for your intervention and offers you a piece of info of your choosing. If you spoke to the Trilkai back in Killorn Keep, which may seem odd to some of you, but for others talking to cats just comes naturally, you may ask the Wisp about the origin of their species. It's strongly hinted that they're a de-evolution of the Kilrothi from the Wing Commander games. I mean, the name is literally an anagram. If you return to the Trilkai and relay this information, they'll warn you that the Guardian's finest warlord, a woman named Mors Gotha, is planning to invade Britannia immediately. From that point forward, if the Killorn Keep guards become hostile, the Trilkai will remain peaceful and refuse to attack you. It's such an easily missable chain of events that stretches from pretty much the beginning of the game until the very end, but it's pretty slick. This is the kind of thing you tell your friends about at school and they just don't believe you until they go try it for themselves. One last dreamer of note is Mokpo. You initially meet this guy all the way back in the ice caves, close to the beginning of the game. He comes across as a bit of a nut, talking about all his visions and refusing to believe that you're real, but he's harmless. If you speak to a particular trader in Killorn Keep, they'll tell you about the so-called Dream Spice, a magical herb which allows a person to visit other worlds in their dreams. This corroborates Mokpo's ramblings. With this in mind, you'll notice the plants growing by the graves in Praecor Loth's tomb don't look like anything you've seen. If you eat these herbs prior to sleeping, you'll dream of the Ethereal Void, allowing you to look around without risk of death. Sometimes you'll even dream of the Shrine of Spirituality, which is where the final Blackrock Shard is located. Unfortunately, you can't add items to your inventory while dreaming, but it's cool that they let you take a look. When you reach the shrine for real, it's surrounded by impassable bars. One way of getting in here calls for some old-fashioned magery. Casting a levitation spell, you fly upwards, becoming parallel with the shrine. You can then cast a teleportation spell that moves you through the walls to the nearest traversable surface. Now that's really using your noggin, but the non-magical method of acquiring the shard is quite possibly the most brilliant puzzle in any Ultima game. As I mentioned, when you're dreaming of the Ethereal Void, you can't pick anything up and take it with you, but you can still manipulate the environment. If you're lucky enough to dream of the Shrine of Spirituality, you can pick up the shard and throw it outside the shrine's bars. Then, in real life, so to speak, you can arrive at the shrine and pick the shard up off the ground without having to contend with the bars. When dreaming of the Ethereal Void, you're essentially astral projecting, which means the location itself is real. The things you do there are persistent when you come back later. This is such a good puzzle, not only because it uses mechanics in a unique and clever way, but because it's telegraphed so well for those who are paying attention to dialogue. I had messed around with the Dream Spice prior to reaching the Void and tossed the shard on the ground after I noticed I couldn't put it in my inventory. That's what most people are going to do. You're not going to gingerly place it back where you found it. Then, later on, when you notice that the shard is where you left it in the dream, the solution to the puzzle kind of clicks into place. It's just great design with multiple solutions to boot. Once you've retrieved the rod from its resting place in the Void and return it to Zoranthus, he'll give you the bottled air gem. The bottle is placed at the center of a ritual binding site in the Void where it inhabits the Avatar's galvanized body. You literally have to craft yourself a suit of spirit armor and possess yourself with a wind elemental in order to play a war horn to destroy the dome. This is metal. It's at this point where the Guardian soldiers begin teleporting into Castle Britannia from Killorn. This is one of the few interactions where the happenings of one world touch another in a direct way. Altera has already fled Killorn in fear for her life, leaving behind a note instructing the Avatar to find Mors Gotha's spellbook. It just so happens that Mors Gotha is visiting the keep in preparation to invade Britannia. Hey, if I cast an open spell on the door to her room, do you guys think these soldiers will be annoyed by my action? Oh, I just want to talk to her. I just want to. After quite a strenuous battle with Gotha and every guard in the Tri-County area, she's saved by the Guardian. It probably doesn't bear saying at this point, but this doesn't reflect well on the Guardian's character. It seems like kind of an understatement. Not the fact that he does save Mors Gotha, but the fact that in doing so, we have incontrovertible proof that he can choose to save people and deliberately did not extend the same courtesy to Mayor Patterson, even when begged. Poor Patterson, just a pathetic little pawn in the Guardian's games. And you know what? I actually liked Patterson. Yes, he cheated on his wife. Yes, he was all in on the Fellowship. But damn it, he looked like Frank Zappa, and he was sad all the time because nobody liked him, and I can't help but root for the underdog. With Gotha's spellbook in hand, we rush back to Castle Britannia, already being invaded by Gotha and her troops once again. Morgotha has kind of been hyped up throughout this game as the Guardian's personal attack dog. In the Underworld II cluebook, it says that Gotha is the only human who's ever physically stood in the Guardian's presence and lived to tell about it. So it's only appropriate that she acts as the final boss. She's sort of like the anti-Avatar, the Guardian's personal representative. Even with a squad of guards behind her though, her might pales in comparison to that of the Avatar. And that's pretty sad because a few hours ago his muscles were so atrophied that rats were giving him trouble. She cries out for the Guardian once more, but this time the Guardian does not come. Using knowledge gleaned from Gotha's spellbook, Nystol untangles the Guardian's dread magic. With the gem unstable and the manifestation of wind inhabiting the Avatar, the horn of Praecor Loth is blown and the black rock crumbles into dust. Victory is achieved, but the restoration of Britannia is still at hand. Thus ends the tale of Ultima Underworld II, Labyrinth of Worlds. More than any other game in this series, with Labyrinth of Worlds, I felt the need to take you on the journey with me. It's a very hard game to talk about in generalities, and that's because it's a fragmented experience. Once you understand how level 1 of the Stygian Abyss works, getting to grips with the rest of the game is easy. It follows those same principles established early. That is not the case with Underworld 2. Each level here is vastly different than what came before it. One minute you're kissing up to goblins to maintain your cover as a delivery man, the next your nose is out of the frying pan and into the fribbery. There's no way to paint the experience of this multi-dimensional labyrinth with such a broad brush. The fractured nature of the game was a deliberate move on Looking Glass's part. Each designer was granted their own domain with the basic framework of the Underworld engine to work with. The result is an exhibition of creativity and diversity of game design, but also a game punctuated by these long stretches of time where it fails to execute on those concepts that made Underworld so great in the first place. By design then, what we have here is a much less holistic experience. The feeling that characterized the original game, like you're an explorer slowly charting this dark, forgotten city, is only felt sporadically in the sequel. Instead, you're more like a transient visitor, popping in to say hello, grab a black rock shard, maybe come back and visit when you need some basilisk oil later. The engine's strongest elements are still present, the immersive simulation is still as good as it's ever been, and the emergent situations are still delightful at times. But having each world isolated from one another makes for an inconsistent experience, and one that doesn't execute on its central ideas with the grace of the Stygian Abyss. The structure here is much more level-based, and that does make for a more linear game, but Looking Glass's attempts to value add to this structure go places that no Ultima has gone before or since. There's a great balance of simulation and decision-making that results in plenty of potential experiences one could have. How you choose to handle side quests or what character build you go with, these decisions may not affect the central thrust of the plot, but they give you an opportunity to tailor your adventure in a way that Underworld 1 didn't. There are just so many distinctive characters that you can meet or ignore on this journey, and so many stories quietly being told underneath the surface. On that note, the story is a much stronger driving force here. Due to engine constraints, you're still trapped underground throughout the game, but the tales you're asked to partake in do a great job of carrying your imagination beyond the gloomy walls of the dungeons. From attempting to understand the culture of a truly alien world to concluding epic tales hundreds of years in the making, Underworld 2 isn't always great, but it's always interesting. In the Stygian Abyss, you arrive long after the most significant events have occurred. In Labyrinth, you're an active participant in those events. If you want to crash Killorn Keep and doom yourself to an unfinishable playthrough, have at it. If you want to gain respect and defeat Dorstag in fair combat on his terms, go right ahead. In this way, Underworld 2 almost feels like an anthology game, a collection of tall tales and stylistic experiments bound by a single thread. They're not all winners, but the variety is so high that you'll inevitably find yourself invested again. In addition to player choice, there's a lot of seemingly small things that really enhance the experience too. The quiet moments of environmental storytelling you come across, for example, and the ways in which the world changes. The concept of a central hub full of NPCs whose dialogue evolves depending on your progress was really forward-thinking. Introducing pressing conflicts like the castle murder whodunit or the servant strike provides an immediacy to the story that's hard to capture with abstract goals like collecting talismans or finding black rock shards. Underneath some lingering issues like an unbalanced skill system and larger problems like pacing that languishes at times, there's a great dungeon crawler here, one that even occasionally has great dungeons to crawl through. Some people love it, others swear by the original. As a complete package, the Stygian Abyss is unbeaten in my eyes, but with a few more months of development time, some breathing room for design revisions, Labyrinth of Worlds could have been the undisputed king of the Underworld. Much like the Worlds of Ultima games, Labyrinth is a welcome foray into Ultima's wild side, one that peeks beyond the veil of Britannia. Those eccentricities do go a long way in giving the game lasting appeal. It's hard to not be drawn in by its fluorescent blues and yellows in a sea of grays and browns. It doesn't quite stick the landing, but having been made in a mere 9 months, Underworld II is an impressive work and an important stepping stone in the story of Looking Glass Technologies. In the years since Underworld II's release, Paul Neurath has lamented its development cycle. He feels it was rushed out the door as quickly as possible, a business decision from Origin that gave Looking Glass's developers no time to internalize and apply their Underworld I experience. The production of the sequel was fraught with stress and burnout, and several key individuals from the development team have agreed that this affected the final product negatively. Nonetheless, Underworld II received glowing praise at the time, following in the footsteps of the first game. Even computer gaming world Scorpia, who was notoriously hard on many RPGs, including Ultima 7, had to admit that Underworld II was, quote, a good follow-up to the previous entry. Despite the great reviews and goodwill generated from the first game, Labyrinth of Worlds didn't fly off store shelves. Reportedly, the game sold about half as much as the original, and unlike the Stygian Abyss, sales did not pick up over time. Origin's push to have the game on store shelves by Christmas of '93 resulted in a sequel that wasn't an impressive enough leap over its predecessor to get gamers excited. While selling half as much as Underworld might seem disappointing, this doesn't paint the complete picture. If Neurath's information is correct, then the original game sold 500,000 copies, an absolute smash hit blockbuster by 1993 PC gaming standards. This means that Underworld 2, on top of being fairly cheap to produce, sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 units. You'd be hard-pressed to find any CRPG developer who wouldn't be envious of numbers like that at the time. As we know by now, Richard Garriott's personal credo when it came to mainline sequels was to start from scratch with state-of-the-art tech each time. Most RPG developers did not abide by this rule, and most RPG sequels saw their prospective player bases shrink. When looked at as a direct continuation of Underworld, the sequel wasn't a failure at all. The fact that it even managed to court half of the original game's players is a noteworthy feat. The game sold, and it sold well, but it hadn't met Origin's lofty expectations. It was starting to look like Origin Systems, the den of creativity formed out of frustration with money-obsessed publishers, was becoming a money-obsessed publisher. Despite Looking Glass repeatedly pitching the idea over the years following the second game, Origin never agreed to produce a third Underworld. Paul Neurath, while proud of Labyrinth, has expressed regret over this. His hope was to take the lessons learned from the second game and really impress fans with a third Underworld, a true evolution of the original game built on a whole new engine. For as legendary a legacy as it's left behind, Ultima Underworld all these years later remains a duology. Perhaps that was for the best, as Looking Glass would go on to create their own worlds outside of Britannia and innovate in entirely new ways. Back in Austin, Texas, Origin was on the precipice of 2 new chapters. One, a chapter in the Ultima series, a direct continuation of the Black Gate, built on Ultima 7's still impressive engine. The other, a chapter in the company's history, the introduction of a wrench in the up-and-coming machine that was Origin Systems Incorporated. A powerful benefactor, a financial savior, and a ruthless, blood-sucking villain, one that would make the Guardian blush. Next time on the Ultima Retrospective. Alright, so we all know that Lord Thibris has a chest full of eyeballs in his bedroom. Why does he have them? We can only speculate, but what I really want to know is, what's inside Lord British's chest? If you go up to his bedroom, you'll find a massive locked chest that can't be opened through conventional means. I stand there bashing it until I got blisters on my fingers, nothing. I try picking a lock, no dice, even with a maxed out lock picking skill. I try the cudgel of opening, but that doesn't work either. So this is typically where you turn to the open spell, but of course it can't be cast because we're in Castle Britannia right now, and the Blackrock is preventing it from being cast. So there is a way to get this thing open, but it's a little cockamamie. You have to travel through the castle, down to the Blackrock gem, and into another world where you can then cast the open spell. The spell dissipates when you click on something, but there are actually no doors or switches that need to be pressed between the gem and Lord British's room, so you can just have an open spell loaded in the chamber, and by the time you get to the chest, you can use it there. So, we open it up, and okay, the plot thickens. Why do both Lord Thibris and Lord British have a chest full of eyeballs? My first thought was, okay, maybe Looking Glass just assumed that nobody would ever open this chest, so they just duplicated the existing chest from Thibris's room and then placed it in this bedroom for efficiency's sake. But that's definitely not the case, because the contents of Lord British's chest are slightly different than Thibris's, which means that it was deliberately made to contain eyeballs. With Thibris, there's sort of a connection at least with the brain creatures, but why British? What sort of war crimes is this sick bastard committing? I would love to know if somebody has an answer to this question.